Hello, welcome to another episode of Lessons from a Podcaster. Today, here with me, Donna. Donna, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tiago. I'm happy to be here.
Podcasting to build relationships, even with people that we know for a long time, right? We're
Mhm.
just talking about how sometimes in interviews you discover certain aspects of a person that you know for a long time. Why do you think that happens?
I think it's how the conversation flows. And, you might be on a podcast trying to keep it, we're business to business, keeping it very
Hmm.
business to business, but something happens. So, yesterday I was on a call talking to a gentleman. He's in the manufacturing space, but it ended up he lived in Italy for 35 years. My daughter's leaving to move to Italy in 3 weeks, and she's going to the same
Oh
exact
wow.
region. So you start to build this rapport with people that really just develops that relationship and gives it a strong
Hmm.
foundation.
Do you follow those line of questions when you discover these kind of things, even though it might not totally fit into the format of your interview?
I always start our interviews off with kind of four rough questions I have in my head, but I've told my guests I want it to be conversational. I want it to be
Hmm.
as if we're at a coffee shop and someone's listening in on our conversation. I don't want it to seem scripted. And so if those personal aspects come in, I think that shows that it's authentic.
Yeah, and it's unique as well, right? So those
Yep.
are topics that if your podcast is around marketing, there's a lot of topics that people can listen in other podcasts, right? But that specific story, it's probably quite unique, right? Like
Yes.
that guest probably didn't tell it in many other interviews.
No.
But Tell us, Donna, what is your podcast, and like to do a short pitch about it.
Sure. The podcast is B2B Marketing Excellence. It's where I go around the world talking with business leaders about their marketing, what's working, what's not. And then, of course, what do they see for the future? Because marketing is evolving at warp speed. So, how do
Hmm.
companies keep up with that?
Hmm. Totally. Do you think companies should go into podcasting? Do you think it's a good kind of technique to grow their branding, to grow their marketing, their presence?
Yes, definitely. Matter of fact, I've been talking to more clients about it because I love in-person events. You get to meet the
Hmm.
person, you get to see them, you get a feel for them. Well, if you can't do in-person events, I feel podcasting is that next option
Mm.
because as they look at you, they resonate with you. Like I said before, I'm a little quirky. So sometimes people really like that. And the people who like that are the people you want to work with. If
Mm.
your personality is totally different than mine, we probably won't be a good fit. So
Right.
yes, I
Yeah.
definitely think podcasting is a great way for brands to get more humanized. And
Hmm.
because I do a lot in the industrial manufacturing space, that's what those companies need to do. They need to
Mm.
humanize the brand. And the best way to do that is to get their people out and in front of the camera.
Interesting. What type of companies do you work with?
I work with a lot of manufacturers in the pharmaceutical space,
Hmm.
metalworking, or the food industry.
Wow.
Yeah. So usually my clients are selling expensive pieces of equipment. And of course,
Metalworking.
yeah,
That's
metalworking.
interesting because how can you make a podcast about metalworking and company that works with metal interesting?
For years being in the B2B space, I'm like, oh, this is so boring. I wish I was on B2C. But what I
Right.
found is the people who are in your space are going to find it interesting.
Mm.
So if you listen to
Yeah.
my podcast, if I'm talking to a manufacturer or I'm speaking to the publisher of Robotics World, if you're not in that space, you might be like, I'm not going to
Yeah.
listen to
Yeah.
this podcast. But if you're in the space, you see the value in it. And I think that
Mm.
comes down to people knowing really their target audience and making sure that their podcast really talks to that audience.
Mhm.
As much
Yeah.
as I would like to have kittens on my podcast so I could grow,
Everyone is.
so I could get lots of viewers, I would love that, but it
Yeah.
wouldn't be
Yeah.
the right audience.
But I was a proud guest also of your podcast,
Mm.
but I work in the different areas. So, what is the target of your podcasting? Do you focus only on one specific industry? Do you focus in multiple things? What do you try
We
to
usually
explain?
try to stick to the industrial space, but it's also, are there platforms out there that our clients should be aware of? Like I
Hmm.
mentioned, I am talking to my clients about doing podcasts. And so
Right.
PodSqueeze, I wanted you on as a guest because you help simplify the process.
Hmm.
Because when I go
Okay.
into companies, they're like, Donna, we don't have the manpower for this. We can't do a podcast. And I'm like, well, could you sit for 20 minutes and give an interview? And then they're like, oh, well, I could do that, but what about all the back end, the show notes and this and that? I'm like,
Hmm.
well, that's where PodSqueeze comes in. And so that's why I had you on the show. But I'll have other people in tech stack there. I'll have publishers.
Hmm.
I have manufacturers there, just to
Hmm.
give it value, and people can hear from different organizations about what they do to
Right.
promote their businesses.
So, with your podcast, do you have your podcast and then interview all these people in the industrial sector, or do you also, as a business, try to promote and manage a podcast for their company?
That is an area that our company just started to get into, because our
Mm.
company is 43 years old. It started 43 years ago as a list
Wow.
company. So if Frost and Sullivan or Forrester or Forbes wanted a mailing list, because it was 43 years ago, we would
Mm.
help you find those lists. Now, obviously, we had to evolve to stay current. So we help clients find good quality email lists, banners, sponsorships. It really comes down to, we help our
Okay.
clients get to the right spot where their audience is. And that's why podcasting has now come on, and
Hmm.
it's now something we're offering.
Do you have any more specific events or examples, rather, where a company that was not sure about starting a podcast then started and they started to actually see the impact of this podcast in their branding and in their business?
Yes, and it's funny, it's not the numbers. We
Hmm.
all wanna see the numbers. We wanna see the number of views,
Yeah.
the downloads, the this, the that. And I have to tell you from personal experience, it's come from me going to conferences and people coming up to me saying, "Oh, I saw your podcast. Keep up the good work." And I don't even know who these people are. And it's the legs that we've gotten out of our podcast that keeps us going,
Hmm.
because we are in a kind of specific niche area.
Right.
It's not for everyone. But after every episode, I hear from people that I work with and some prospects saying, "Thanks for sending it. This had a lot of value."
Hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting because I've heard from a lot of podcasters that, especially when they are trying to find sponsorships,
Mhm.
they say that it's hard to show the value to a sponsor because, yes, as you said, they won't get clients right away.
No.
They won't get clicks right away. It's completely different than maybe other types of marketing like SEO.
Mhm.
So, how do you explain the value of branding to a sponsor?
This is a topic I talk about all the time, because I'll
Mhm.
have clients who give me the big board, like, "Donna, we got this many leads, you got this."
Yeah.
And I'll be like, "Well, what about the branding?" And some of them will say, "Well, we don't care about branding." And I sit there going, "Wait a minute. You don't care about branding?" But I feel that a podcast is something, you put that branding out there and that goes for decades. It's
Mhm.
not just a lead generation campaign at that one moment. And so it is something, our podcast episodes are evergreen. So we're
Right.
constantly repurposing them, putting them out there. Every podcast we do, and I think you got some of them, we create videograms. We sometimes have
Mhm.
audiograms, so that we change it up and we put it into short form, which is so important because, short form videos are received better. We've seen a
Yeah.
12-time better response rate on short form versus the long.
Mhm. Where do you share those short form videos? Is it only YouTube or TikTok as well, Instagram?
That's a funny thing you should say, that we Instagram and YouTube, definitely. TikTok is now on our radar to do.
Hmm.
And we're going to start posting them out on TikTok. And it's very interesting because being in the industrial space for a while, I was like, okay, TikTok is not our audience, but I'm seeing that change a lot.
Hmm. Yeah. For us, we tried with YouTube and it's actually working quite well, even though
Yeah.
we are still trying to figure out. Because what our experience with shorts is that we do get a huge boost. Sometimes we get like thousands of views,
Yeah.
but then it just dies out immediately.
Yeah, we see that too. And I'll post things on like a Saturday if I'm walking in the woods or doing something just so that people get more of a feel of who I am. If I'm not at a desk, I'm usually outside. And so I post
Mhm.
those and I find those get higher numbers, but that's not really going to fuel our
Yes.
bottom line. But at least
Mhm.
they get a feel for who I am as the CEO of World Innovators. And then they'll kind of get a gist of our company. It's a family
Yeah,
owned company that, like I mentioned, has been around for 43 years. And that's important for people to see.
totally. And if I give a little example, if I can give a little example on PodSqueeze, since we started doing these lessons from a podcast interviews, I find that first of all it's great because I get to meet a lot of our customers, and the I feel that the retention kind of goes up because
Mhm.
now people can connect the face to the product,
Yep.
and that's very powerful. Again, that's not. It's branding, right? That it's not connected to clicks, not connected with new leads necessarily, but churn is as important
Oh,
as new clients,
yeah.
right? So these are the things that, and now speaking a little bit to the listeners, if they are either in the business of selling, podcasting service to their clients, or even for their own brand,
Yeah.
think about branding as well, and think about the yes, you won't get immediately a lot of clients right away, but you'll get a lot of benefits that a lot of them you will only be able to see maybe 2-3 months ahead, right?
You're right. And it goes back to you're humanizing your brand. You're
Hmm.
showing, hey, I'm Tiago. I'm one of the founders of PodSqueeze. And then for you to take the initiative to interview your customers makes the customers feel like you value their opinion on how they're
Hmm.
using your platform, maybe any additional features you're going to add to the platform in the future.
Oh yeah.
And as a customer, when you feel like you have a say, or you could
Hmm.
maybe help direct you, it just, like you said, it creates that bond that it,
Yeah.
it won't be broken. It won't be when the next platform comes up, if it's less expensive, the person's not going to jump.
Yeah, totally. I
Yeah.
was talking here in one of the already published interviews with Josh, and he said something really interesting, which was that when someone is starting a podcast, especially if it's to support their business, they shouldn't think too much about the audience right away. They should think on just by having the interview, are you adding value?
Yep.
Right? Are
Yes.
you
Yeah.
either connecting with new leads or connecting with customers or learning something by interviewing people that are experts in the industry?
Hmm.
So I really like that. I
I
really
like
like
that.
that point of the moment you start a podcast, even if you have like one download or zero downloads,
Yeah.
you are already getting value.
You are. And I think when someone starts a podcast, it shouldn't be with the premise you want to increase sales. Really, I feel
Hmm.
all marketing. This is my take on it. Marketing right now should be offering value, offer education, give, give more than you're receiving. And you
Hmm.
put that information out there. And like I said, I'm interviewing people that some of my clients could be like, oh, okay, I'm going to go direct. I'll just go
Right.
talk to them direct. And if that's what they want to do, uh, go ahead and do that. But I think, we're on this world to inspire others. And that's what I'm trying to do with the podcast.
Hmm. Yeah, totally. Shifting gears a little bit, I'm interested in knowing, and we spoke a little bit already about it, your whole process so you do your interview. What's the process from finishing recording, editing, repurposing, and as well, what platforms do you find most successful for your type of podcast?
Okay, when we get a guest, and usually my guests are based on clients, information clients are asking me or a source, and that's how we determine the guests. They then get an
Mhm.
interview brief of the 4 questions I think would be most relevant for the audience. I also ask them what do they feel is hot in their area that they want to talk about, so that it's a give and take. It's not just a podcast for world innovators, but it's something the guests could really get value out of.
Right. Hmm.
Then afterwards, it goes off to my podcast producer who puts it up on Simplecast. But we use Descript in-house to break it up into videograms. We do that a lot. We change it up based on whether it's going to be a portfolio, a square, landscape, because we give our guests at least 6 videograms of all different sizes that they can use. And
Mm.
a lot of the videograms, you wouldn't even know I was in it. It could be just my guest because we want
Right.
that to be value for our guest. It's not all about marketing world innovators. And so we
Hmm.
use Descript for that, but we use the PodSqueeze platform, as you know. That's why I'm here. We use that to help us with the show notes. I have found
Mm.
that to be a great time saver for myself because sitting down after an interview, and no one can do that process for me. PodSqueeze can because you go through the whole interview, but I like seeing the show notes because PodSqueeze determines it, but I always think you need to make it unique. You need
Right.
to put in your unique flair or something that was said in the interview that'll make it stand out. And so I review the show notes. Also within the PodSqueeze platform, I do like how the social posts get created, especially for LinkedIn. And
Hmm.
again, though, with all AI tools, I'll tell my clients it's a baseline. You
Yeah.
need to change it up. Don't just use it copy paste because
Totally.
the only way you're going to stand out in the world is if you make sure there's a uniqueness to it. So, world innovators, we're a B2B
Hmm.
marketing agency. There's tons of them. But how many of them are 43 years old, family owned, woman owned companies? So
Hmm.
we always try to put that in there
That
because,
perspective. Hmm.
yes, because it'll make us stand out.
Hmm. Yeah. Uh, I'm. I was talking with my co-founder João, and we often go through the Facebook groups, and we see what podcasters are asking, and we often see when people ask, "Hey, I'm about to start a new podcast. What should I consider?" And normally the questions and the suggestions are around you need a microphone,
Mhm.
you need a host platform, something
Mhm.
where you can host your podcast, and that's basically it. Do you think that this AI, so there's not a lot of talk still around AI
Yes.
and what squeeze like tools? Do you think that in the future these tools are going to be essential for podcasters, that in the future they'll be like, okay, I use PodSqueeze for the show notes, Descript for the clips, and then let's say Libsyn or
Yeah.
Spotify to host my. Do you think that we're going that way, or do you think that these kind of tools are still and will never be essential for podcasting?
No, I think these tools are going to be essential in the future. It all comes down to we're all short on time. And so
Mm.
if you want to keep a podcast going, and that's the one thing I would say to the listeners that if you're going to start a podcast, work on your frequency. It
Hmm.
doesn't make sense to do a podcast and then not do another one for another 3 months. And that's like all
Right.
marketing. I don't think you should ever do one thing and not be out there again. It needs to be a nice, consistent flow. And
Hmm.
in order to keep up with that, you'd almost be silly not to use these AI tools because you would have to have tons of time. And like I said, you don't want to just do your interview and hand everything over to your team to do because the interviewer has to be involved. And usually, if the interviewer, like myself, is a CEO, I have a billion other things I need to be concentrating on. I can't spend a large section of my time
Hmm.
on the podcast. And so, yes, these
Totally.
tools are going to be
Hmm.
definitely, I think they're going to be in very high demand.
Do you think that consistency is one of the secrets to grow a podcast?
Yes, I think it is to grow a podcast. And I think that's where people have to sit down and think about what frequency can I really keep up with?
Mm-hmm.
How long should the interviews be? And that's a tricky thing because I've heard people say if it's a good interview, they don't care if it
Yeah.
goes for 45, an hour and a half, whatever, as
Mm-hmm.
long as you're offering value through the whole podcast.
Totally.
But
Mm-hmm.
consistency, yes, is key. People have to know ours is every other week. We have changed around the days. We are now going live on Fridays. I like that day because I think everyone has time to look at a podcast. But
Mm-hmm.
then throughout the rest of the months and days, we might put short clips here and there just because people have to realize you do one podcast, don't just promote it once, keep getting it out there.
So in between, so you say every other week, so you have around uh, 2 weeks in
Hmm.
between episodes, right? So
Hmm.
do you share in between those days? You share things around, or do you just share all the year around? Like you go back and say, okay, it's time again to share the interview number 2.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, we're sharing it all year round. And I have to tell you,
okay.
before we weren't as good as that.
Mm-hmm.
Before we were kind of had one episode we promoted, it got emailed out to our list of over 8,000. It went on our social platforms, and then that was it. Then we did the next one. And after talking to my team, and because the content is so evergreen, they get put out there. So I don't even know
Interesting.
what my team put out there, but you could see tomorrow a podcast I did maybe 6 months ago.
Mm-hmm. And what platforms do you use? I know that you use LinkedIn a lot. Is that your main platform, or is there something else?
LinkedIn is probably our main platform. Like I said, we're in the industrial space. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where
Makes
our
sense.
audience is. We are going to try TikTok. We were
Mm-hmm.
doing Facebook. Facebook, I think my office will sometimes put it out there. Twitter, we are not doing as much anymore. It just doesn't seem to be our audience.
Mm-hmm.
Instagram, yes.
How do you know if it's your audience? By the way, how can one measure if that platform is working for you?
I just look around and I know people are probably like, well, that doesn't sound like a good strategy. But I look around at the people who are commenting or liking our podcasts. Also, just what I see when I go onto Twitter. Is that what I want to be associated with? Or do I want to
Mm,
stay to our business? And like, because we're B2B and we're industrial, LinkedIn is our main
right.
spot. But of
Makes
course,
sense.
we're also on YouTube a lot because we're on
Hmm.
YouTube for our podcast, but also we do LinkedIn lives once a week, and those get put
Interesting.
onto YouTube also.
How does that work? Is it good?
I like LinkedIn lives a lot. I do one every week on a Thursday, and I will talk about the topic that might have come up that day or the day before. And so it's very current to what clients are asking me.
Hmm.
And I have gotten a lot of positive feedback to that because I do put a personal spin on it. I think last
Right.
week it was about being patient. And I started with a story of mine. You know, I have a pond across the street and I'm always trying to be patient for it to freeze so I can go out on the ice. And I wasn't patient.
Ah.
And so I
Oh,
usually try to bring in
that's not good.
yeah, yeah, a story with the lesson because marketing is about patience and a lot of
Mhm.
top management, they don't like to be patient. They just want the result. So they change it up too much.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah. What else works well in LinkedIn? Is it like longer posts? Is it videos? If you could only do one post, one type of post on LinkedIn, what would that be?
Oh, uh, that's a hard one because I do have some people on LinkedIn who will click and watch the whole interview, but
Mm,
the short, yeah, I would say like our 3 minute video clips from a
mm-hmm.
podcast interview, because what we do is we have the video clip, but then up in the body, you have the full podcast link. So those 3 minute ones, I think that kind of hooks people in and they're like, okay, I want to listen to the rest. That's
Right.
probably our favorite. But then we do quotes from our guests, and that gets put up as a static image. It shows the individual's face, so that you're putting a real human to this
Mm-hmm.
quote. And you're not seeing it from a Seth Godin or a Tony Robbins. You're seeing it from someone who's just like you. And so people
Yeah.
resonate with that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So kind of trying out multiple things, see what works, and repurposing content across the year, not
Yeah.
only across the days after the published date.
Yes.
Donna, those are really great tips, and I think a lot of our listeners will implement them right away.
Good.
Before we finish, I would love to give you space again to share the name of your podcast and socials and where people can find you.
Okay, yes. Our podcast is B2B Marketing Excellence. I go around the world talking with industry leaders, marketing executives about what is working, what is not. And the whole premise was so that companies would do quality marketing and they would see the results, so that they would do a nice steady growth versus this kind of growth, which is exhausting.
Yeah.
You can find us. Our website is worldinnovators.com. On there is a podcast page, so you could see all our episodes there. You can also go to World Innovators, the YouTube page, and again, all our lives and our podcasts are there. If you'd like to reach out to me on LinkedIn, it's LinkedIn and it's Donna A. Peterson. So there you go. You can reach me on a variety of different channels.
Totally. And I will also link everything in the show notes of this episode.
Excellent.
Donna, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
This podcast is brought to you by PodSqueeze, an essential tool for podcasters that creates show notes, timestamps, clips, and more. Visit podsqueeze.com and use the code PODCASTER for 20% discount in the first 3 months. We release a new episode every Tuesday and Thursday. See you in the next episode of Lessons from a Podcaster.